The doorbell didn't ring, it boomed like a battering ram slamming against the calm of a Sunday morning. My coffee mug trembled on the kitchen counter. When I opened the door, there stood the entire HOA board in matching windbreakers and smug expressions, flanked by two security guards with clipboards. But before I could even say violation of what, a voice boomed from behind me, deeper, calmer, and unmistakably lethal. "You'll be addressing me now." They froze. One of the guards actually dropped his pen, because stepping forward from the hallway, still wearing his tactical gloves and aviators, was my son's full-time bodyguard and former Special Forces operative. When I first moved into Sycamore Hollow, I thought I'd found heaven in a zip code quiet cul-de-sac, neighbors who waved politely without getting nosy, and just enough space between houses that you didn't hear every dog bark or toddler tantrum next door. After 32 years working federal procurement, and the last 7 of those dealing with crisis contracts in less than friendly time zones, I was ready for peace. My son Alex had come to live with me after what the Pentagon politely called a non-conventional injury incident. He was medically retired, spine full of titanium scars in places he didn't talk about, and more nightmares than sleep. Most nights he never complained, but I did loudly at any doctor who dared dismiss his pain, or any bureaucrat who slow-walked his benefits. Eventually, we found a rhythm: physical therapy in the mornings, chess on the porch in the afternoons, and grilled ribs every Sunday. I'd kill for that kind of simple life, so I fought for it, which is how we ended up hiring Grant. On paper, he was a recovery assistant, but anyone with eyes and ears knew he was more than that. Built like a tank in slacks, polite to a fault, and moved like someone who'd walked through fire and come out smarter. Ex-Special Forces, we later learned, probably Delta or something with fewer vowels. He cooked, cleaned, made sure Alex didn't push too hard on the bad days, and once fixed the water heater without blinking. He also jogged perimeter checks at night like a ghost with a Glock. The HOA didn't like that, not one bit. At first, things were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think maybe the horror stories were overblown. A welcome packet arrived with free cookies and a printed newsletter full of fake cheer and recycled clip art. There was a map of approved exterior design colors, a list of forbidden tree species, and a note that read, "Together we maintain harmony." Sounded more like a threat than a motto. I shrugged it off, but then the letter started. At first, I laughed. Violation: grass exceeds acceptable height limit. It was an inch taller than regulation. My mower had broken that week, and I'd planned to trim it the next morning. Then came mailbox: finished, not compliant with community aesthetics, apparently black. Matte wasn't part of the approved palette. I painted it beige, cursing under my breath. But the third letter, that's when I stopped laughing. Urgent: remove all non-approved storm protection devices immediately. Your home features reinforced shutters which do not conform to neighborhood visual standards. Visual standards, that's what they called it. The same storm shutters that withstood a Category 4 hurricane without so much as a scratch. Apparently, they were too military-looking. I responded with documentation from FEMA and my insurance provider praising the design. I even invited the HOA president to my home for a civil conversation. Her name was Brenda Holloway, all Botox smiles and pearl earrings, the kind of woman who wears a blazer to take out the recycling and thinks sarcasm is a form of assault. She arrived with 2 clipboard-toting board members, did a quick lap of my property like a general inspecting a trench, and informed me that optics matter. I reminded her that optics don't keep broken glass from flying into your skull during a hurricane. She smiled and said, "Rules are rules." A week later, the fine arrived: $250 for removal of non-conforming structures. I filed a formal appeal and waited. They didn't respond. Instead, they filed another violation: unauthorized cohabitation. I nearly dropped my coffee reading that 1-hour records indicate an adult male of non-familiar relation is living at your residence. This is in violation of Sycamore Hollow's single-family dwelling clause. I reread it 3 times. Grant. They were talking about Grant. I called the HOA office directly and got a chirpy woman named Colleen who said, "Oh yes, sir, that includes all tenants' aides and unrelated guests beyond 30 days. I explained that Grant was employed as part of my son's recovery and was legally documented as a live-in caregiver. That's a medical exemption, I said, and protected under both state housing laws and the Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act. She paused, clearly reading a script, then said, "Well, you'll need to present that in writing at the next board meeting, otherwise fines will accumulate." I hung up. No curse words, no yelling, just silence, that kind of silence that feels like the air before a lightning strike. That's when I knew this wasn't about grass or shutters or mailbox colors. This was about power, about control, about someone seeing a man with a scarred son and a silent bodyguard and thinking easy target. But they didn't know who I was. They didn't know I'd spent my career auditing black budget projects and unearthing backdoor deals that made senators sweat. They didn't know the kinds of laws I'd helped write and the kind of favors I could call in, and most of all, they didn't know what kind of man Grant really was, or what kind of line you crossed when you messed with someone he protected. I watched them cross it anyway, and I took notes, because if they wanted a war over whose name belonged on a mailbox and who was allowed to sit on my porch, I'd show them what it meant to fight by the book. A book they didn't even know existed. The next day, I filed a disability accommodation request with supporting documentation from Alex's doctor. I sent it certified mail and made sure to CC every board member and the county zoning commissioner. No response. 2 days later, we found a note taped to our trash bins left curbside beyond a loud pickup window. Fine 25 weed. Brought them in 17 minutes late. I laughed the kind of laugh that's mostly teeth. I walked inside, poured myself a bourbon, and called a friend from my old job who owed me a favor. Hey, I said, I need access to every HOA document on Sycamore Hollow from the past 7 years, public filings, vendor contracts, board voting records, all of it. He paused. That's a tall order. You getting back in the game? Nope. I said, I'm just trying to mow my lawn in peace. And that was the beginning, not of the fight that would come later, but of the moment I stopped trying to play nice and started preparing for war, because Brenda and her board didn't realize it yet. But they just launched a full-scale offensive against a man who'd built his life reading the fine print and standing behind him, a son with the soldiers. Silence and a bodyguard with nothing left to lose. It started with a camera, a tiny black dome tucked neatly beneath the overhang of the street lamp at the corner of my lawn. I only noticed it because the morning sun caught the lens just right, a glint of glass where there shouldn't have been any. At first, I figured it was some new security measure, maybe installed by the city, but when I called the utilities department, they told me they had no record of it. That's when I got suspicious, so I walked the perimeter of my property, found a second one tucked beneath the community bulletin board, 2 houses down, a third mounted discreetly beneath the HOA's newly constructed decorative archway. The one they claimed was for neighborhood charm. None of them pointed toward the street. All of them pointed toward my house. That afternoon, the letters resumed: unsecured trash bin during restricted hours, improper host storage, suspicious activity during non-curfew hours, which I didn't even know was a thing. One notice mentioned visible firearm-like equipment, referring to the foam rollers Grant used for Alex's physical therapy. 2 HOA members, always Brenda's favorites, began appearing around 8 a.m. sharp, measuring grass height and sidewalk width with matching pink tape measures. The new favorite trick was photographing the side yard and emailing me images with timestamps claiming my rehabilitation apparatus read. A foldable incline board violated the community's visual harmony clause. I started documenting everything, every knock, every letter, every random HOA inspection. We installed our own cameras hidden in the shrubs tucked under the eaves, and even one disguised as a birdhouse. Grant ran the feed through an encrypted loop so we could archive it in triplicate on-site cloud-based and off-site on a thumb drive. We kept taped under the porch swing. Brenda ramped things up when she filed an excessive noise disturbance complaint. It stemmed from a Tuesday morning rehab session where Alex and Grant had been outside in the side yard. There was no shouting, no music, just the occasional grunt of exertion as my son lifted a 5 PB medicine ball and the quiet instructions of Grant's voice. According to Brenda, this qualified as a military adjacent disturbance. Her words, not mine. I called a neighborhood board meeting and requested to address the citation. She denied me closed session. She said sensitive topics. So I did what I used to do best. I followed the paper trail and public HOA filings. I found something odd, a line item buried in the expense column, contracted compliance services 18750. That's when the name jumped out, Holloway Civic Enforcement LLC. A quick record search confirmed my suspicion. The company was owned by none other than Kyle Holloway, Brenda's husband, a private firm paid to enforce HOA citations, issue legal-looking notices, and serve remediation orders, which explain the matching windbreakers, the pre-printed clipboards, and the uniform demeanor of the HOA's enforcement squad. They weren't volunteers, they were contractors on Brenda's payroll. I didn't react, not publicly. I let her think the game was still rigged in her favor, but inside, I was already moving the chess pieces. First, I met with a local civil rights attorney, quiet guy, smart eyes. He reviewed everything I'd collected, the Targeted enforcement, the fabricated infractions, the surveillance, they're walking a legal tightrope, he said, and your documentation is a razor, he advised patient strategy. So I listened. The next week, we submitted an anonymous tip to city code enforcement about the cameras installed. Without permits, they came down 2 days later, yanked off the poles by a very red-faced maintenance crew who told me off the record that someone at City Hall was pissed. Then we released footage, just a clip, nothing too aggressive, just Brenda recorded mid-con conversation in her backyard telling one of her board members that we need to squeeze them harder, make them uncomfortable, they'll crack eventually. We posted it to the local neighborhood forum. The post came from a new user named Quiet Neighbor Ray, for it went semi-viral. Within the subdivision, the comment section turned savage. This is not okay. Who are they targeting? Are we next? Brenda responded with a letter hand delivered, of course, claiming the footage was illegally obtained and threatening legal action, which was interesting since the conversation occurred entirely in view of a public sidewalk and was filmed by a camera technically on my property, legal, public, and timestamped. Then came the IRS request. We didn't accuse, we simply requested a routine audit review of HOA Civic Enforcement LLC, citing suspicious compensation practices and lack of proper contractor disclosure. We attached their 990 easy form, publicly accessible, and highlighted a few curious numbers. The total payroll listed was 620, yet Brenda had claimed the team were all unpaid volunteers. We sent the request from a VPN using a public library Aries Wi-Fi. We also submitted it under a fake name. I believe the alias was Bartholomew Granger because Grant has a weird sense of humor. Meanwhile, I began printing every HOA communication, not just the one sent to me, but all the neighborhood-wide notices, event memos, and policy updates. I ran them through a styometric analyzer. It's a little program I wrote during my federal contracting days, detects language patterns, phrases, and hidden fingerprints in writing. The results confirmed what I suspected. Every notice, even the ones allegedly written by the full board, had Brenda's signature style. It wasn't a democracy, it was a one-woman regime, rubber-stamped by people too spineless or too intimidated to resist. One morning, I woke up to find a chalk outline drawn in front of my driveway. Not a crime scene, no, that would be too obvious. This was a stick figure doing push-ups with the word tactical written beneath it in block letters. Beside it, a printed HOA notice reminder, no outdoor workouts permitted before 9 a.m. I laughed, really laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. Brenda was losing control. And in power games, desperation breeds mistakes. That same week, I watched one of her board members, Chuck, a retired orthodontist with too much time and too little spine, sneak into our side yard and measure the distance between our deck railing and the neighbor's fence. I stepped outside with a camera and offered him coffee. He fled like he'd been caught stealing government secrets. A week later, we filed for a restraining order. The grounds: persistent surveillance, coordinated harassment, and retaliatory enforcement of non-legally binding violations. It didn't stick, but it rattled them, because now every action they took had to be weighed against a potential court appearance. We weren't hiding anymore. We weren't crouching behind legal lingo or begging for civility. We were laying tripwires, and Brenda kept stepping on every single one. At the next board meeting, she tried to pass a new rule banning security contractors from residing in the neighborhood, not targeting anyone specific, she said, just protecting the aesthetic values of our community. That night, the rule change was leaked to a local disability rights advocacy group. They reposted it on Twitter. Within 48 hours, Brenda was flooded with messages calling her a bigot, a bully, and a threat to housing equity. Someone spray painted "Not all heroes are hoes" on the neighborhood park gazebo. The HOA tried to scrub it, but by then the story had taken root. People were starting to whisper not just about us, but about Brenda, about Kyle's little enforcement firm, about the backroom deals, the contracts, the power grabs. Whispers become rumors, rumors become momentum, and momentum, well, that becomes an avalanche. We didn't stop the storm, we just kept building the pressure, one leak at a time, one letter at a time, one dead-eyed clipboard warrior at a time. We were bleeding them dry, legally, publicly, and most importantly, patiently. Brenda thought she was playing a game of inches. She had no idea we'd already stolen the whole field right out from under her heels. It was the coffee stain that gave it away, not on my paperwork, on theirs. See, I'd been digging through Sycamore County's land registry for over a week, and I'd grown accustomed to how careless bureaucracy can be. Folders misfiled under wrong years, documents photocopied at odd angles, and yes, the occasional spill mark from a county clerk who liked their espresso strong and their records disorganized. But on page 63 of Archive File 42A, buried beneath 30 years of annexation forms and easement requests, I found a yellowed, brittle sheet stamped February 19, 1972 with a faded blue seal from the Office of County Land Management at the top. In blocky typewritten letters, it read Special Use Exemption Covenant Willow Tributary Agricultural Corridor, now Sycamore Hollow. My fingers actually trembled as I read it. The document was straightforward, shocking almost in its clarity. It outlined that all lots within a designated zone surrounding the now drained Willow tributary were legally exempt from any future civic, municipal, or private governance that attempted to impose external residential controls, meaning no homeowner associations, no board oversight, no cosmetic enforcement, just land as it was meant to be, as it had existed before Brenda and her regime crawled in with bylaws, measuring tape, and judgment. My lot was listed specifically parcel 1412C right there in ink, older than she was. I traced it with my thumb, confirming again and again this wasn't just a loophole, it was a fortress, and it had been here the whole time. The HOA never had any power over me, none. Every fine, every warning, every late-night knock on the door, legally null. I took a long breath and closed the folder. If I were a different man, I might have marched down to Brenda's office that same hour and slammed the document on her desk like a courtroom climax. But I'd learned patience. Brenda wasn't done climbing, and people like her never fall unless they're on a ladder of their own making. So I folded the covenant into a weatherproof sleeve, locked it in my gun safe, and poured myself a whiskey. We were going to play this out quietly, strategically, and then we dropped the hammer. The final overreach came faster than I expected. It arrived, not in an envelope, but in a knock, a heavy one. Measured official. I opened the door to find 3 men in black polo shirts with matching slacks and boots. On their chests were embroidered patches that read Community Enforcement Division, and one carried a body cam that was definitely off, judging by the blinking red light that wasn't blinking. They held clipboards, radios, and wore expressions like mall cops trying to channel SWAT energy. The tallest one stepped forward. "Sir," he said, "we're here to deliver notice of immediate administrative eviction on behalf of the Sycamore Hollow Residential Oversight Board." I blinked. "Come again." "Per noncompliance. Protocol 7C, an unauthorized long-term guest residency. Your household has been found in sustained violation of Articles 12, 14, and 21. You are to vacate within 72 hours or be subject to removal and civil penalty." He handed me a folder thick with paper, most of it printed in size 8 font and pseudo-legal babble. I didn't take it. Instead, I turned and called into the house. "Grant, we've got a situation." Grant stepped out of the hallway like a specter. He was wearing joggers and a t-shirt, but something in the way he carried himself made the men flinch. His eyes didn't blink, his arms didn't swing. When he walked, his presence filled the doorway like someone used to taking control of a room. Without raising his voice, identification, he said flatly. The tallest guy blinked. "We've given verbal notice that satisfies local no. It doesn't grant cut, and you're not officers, you're private contractors. Impersonating unformed officials, that's a felony under Title 18. Section 912. You're about 30 seconds away from getting on a watch list you didn't even know existed." Grant stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "You've been recorded from 5 angles. You've delivered false legal documents to a federally exempt property, and you're standing on private land under false pretenses, which means I'm about to detain you, or you can walk away right now and forget this address exists." The second man, smaller and sweatier, muttered something under his breath and started backing off. The leader glanced at his clipboard, then at Grant, then at me. "You can't scare us. We're acting under board authority." "You mean Brenda's authority?" I asked. "Because your company, Holloway Civic Enforcement, doesn't exist in the state contractor registry. I checked this morning. You're not bonded, you're not licensed. And unless you want to explain to the local sheriff why you're wearing fake badges and threatening disabled veterans on a Tuesday, I suggest you start walking." Grant smiled, not big, just enough to show he wasn't bluffing. The third guy turned and left. The tall one stood a moment longer, like he was deciding between loyalty and self-preservation. Then he followed. I closed the door slowly, no slamming, just the quiet click of control returning that felt like a turning point. I said. Grant nodded. "They're getting reckless." "Good." I said. "We're almost there." What Brenda didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that I'd already sent a copy of the 1972 covenant to 3 places: the county clerk, the regional zoning board, In the Department of Housing Compliance, I filed it under a formal challenge to HOA authority over a historic exemption zone, which meant that even if Brenda tried to enforce anything, it would be flagged, and once the county finished processing it, that exemption would become part of the official zoning map, again public, irrefutable, and legally binding. But I wasn't done. I forwarded the covenant to my lawyer along with a list of every HOA action taken against me since moving in. He called me 2 hours later. "You've got a case for punitive damages," he said. "Multiple violations of the Fair Housing Act, illegal surveillance, attempted fraudulent eviction. If this goes to court, we're talking 6 figures minimum. I don't want money." I told him I want them gone, then we do it slow. He replied, "Let them file one more piece of paperwork, one more bluff, then we take it all down." That final bluff came in the form of a newsletter mailed to every resident. It featured a cheery graphic of a sunset, a quote about unity, and a bolded paragraph in the middle that read, "Reminder, all residents must remain in compliance with updated housing uniformity statutes, including the forthcoming occupant status review scheduled for Q3. Households in violation may be subject to removal, retroactive penalties, or full reassessment of residency privileges." It wasn't just targeted at me anymore. Brenda was swinging at anyone who didn't fit her steep Ford vision. That's when it started unraveling. One of the enforcement agents, the sweaty one, leaked a screenshot of their training document. It included phrases like "target psychological soft spots, escalate discomfort strategically, and push toward voluntary compliance through cumulative pressure." That leak hit the neighborhood forum like a bomb. Within hours, neighbors who'd been silent were suddenly furious. Brenda tried to do damage control, claiming the language was taken out of context. Then Chuck, spineless, trembling Chuck, came forward and resigned from the board. In his statement, he wrote, "I was told the covenant didn't matter, that we could enforce anyway. I trusted her. I shouldn't have. And then finally, I dropped the bomb. I emailed the covenant to every resident in Sycamore Hollow. I attached a plain language breakdown, no legal jargon, just the facts. This neighborhood is not subject to HOA governance. This land was protected before any board existed. You have been lied to." I signed it with my name and a scanned copy of the county's confirmation. The neighborhood lit up like a brush fire. Emails, calls, outrage. Brenda called an emergency board meeting. Never underestimate the power of legal knowledge. You don't need to be a lawyer, but understanding your basic rights, especially regarding property, residence, and occupancy clauses, can mean the difference between being bullied and being protected. Read contracts carefully, learn about local laws, and don't ignore the small legal details. When politeness stops working, switch to strategy. You can choose to play nice, but never let others mistake your silence for weakness. Document every interaction, keep records, save emails, and especially gather photographic or audio evidence. Paper trails are your most powerful weapon in a quiet war. No one has the right to invade your safety or your life. This story shows a harsh truth. Petty power in the wrong hands can become a major threat. But when you stand your ground and prepare thoroughly, even manipulators must back off. Patience is the most powerful form of resistance. In battles like this, a hasty reaction may play into their hands. Instead, fighting with calm, with the law, and at the right time brings lasting victories. Don't fight alone if you don't have to. Seek out attorneys, your community, or even old friends who owe you a favor. Allies make all the difference, especially when you're up against a system being abused. The truth always finds a way, if you're patient enough to protect it. Whether through threats, lies, or isolation, the truth doesn't disappear. It simply waits for someone strong, smart, and determined enough to bring it into the light. Conclusion. This isn't just a story about a man protecting his family from an overreaching HOA. It's proof that, when you know who you are, what ground you stand on, and that the law is on your side, even those in power will have no choice but to retreat.